introductions, and then I'll go on to the agenda proper.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a reminder that the meeting will be recorded and will appear on the Council's website soon after. Members of the committee should leave their camera on, but switch off their microphones until they wish to speak. Officers should switch their microphone and camera off until the convener brings you in to speak. Those observing today's proceedings should have their camera and microphones switched off at all times. If members or officers wish to address the committee, please press the raise your hand icon, which is located on the Teams toolbar, but remember to switch it off after the convener brings you in. I will now start the recording and undertake a roll call to identify those in attendance. Okay, Councillor Reynolds, convener.
Present.
Councillor Bell.
Present.
Councillor Gregg, substituting for Councillor Delaney.
Here.
Councillor Malik.
Here.
And Councillor Al-Samurai, substituting for Councillor Radley.
Present.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to the convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Okay, if we can go on to the agenda proper. The first item on the agenda is determination of urgent business. I suppose this is the urgent business, that's why we're here. Item 2, determination of exempt business. There's no exempt business. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, thank you very much. On to 4.1, which is the minute of the previous meeting. Can I take it that that is a correct minute? Yeah, okay, thank you very much indeed. And on to 5.1, which is the reason we are here, which is the Pittodrie application. Sandy, do you want to do the introduction on that, and then we can take some questions from members?
Yeah, okay, thank you, convener. Yeah, so this is, apologies, I think half the seagulls in Aberdeen are outside my window just now, so if you hear any interference, that's where it's coming from. So this is similar to obviously the previous one for the European game. This is an exemption for the total capacity for the game against Dundee United on Sunday, and is also an exemption from the total hospitality capacity because that's slightly above the guidelines as well. The papers were all circulated to you, so in that you got the risk assessment, the operational plan and the report from our own safety advisory group, which also contained the club's response to that and the remedial actions that they plan to take from that. Since then, the safety advisory group met yesterday, and the outcome from that is that all members, as you'll know, that's made up of members from our own environmental health, trading standards and building standards colleagues who have the enforcement powers under the COVID regulations, and also representatives from the NHS and the police. They were all satisfied. For all the report maybe sounded dodgy in terms of the issues, they were actually quite minor in terms of the grand scheme of things, and the group who were in attendance at the game were satisfied with how the evening progressed, and they're also happy enough with the club's suggestions for the remedial actions to take into account the one or two bits and pieces that did come to the attention. Since then, we've also had a response from the NHS, and if you give me a second, I will just find that for you. Yeah, so the NHS have said the health protection team supports the expert risk assessment undertaken by Environmental and Protective Services colleagues that 6305 spectators can be accommodated in compliance with the requirements of the regulations. The health protection team also supports the remedial actions to address the observed issues at the previous event, such as additional venue staffing capacity, to ensure effective and timely actions as necessary with sufficient knowledge and skills to consistently support adherence to agreed procedures and protocols. The Safety Advisory Group were actually supportive of the slight increase in numbers, as in their view, it's better to have a gradual increase towards a relaxation of all measures rather than just going from fully restricted to nothing at all, because it allows the club and the obviously the officials and what have you to learn from any mistakes from the previous one and put things in place so that when restrictions and things are eased and as crowds get bigger, then they've got that experience as well. So that's about it from my side of things. As I said, both the NHS and our own safety advisory group are supportive of the application by the club as it stands. And as I said, that's for both the total capacity and the slight increase in hospitality capacity as well.
Thanks very much indeed, Sandy. Any questions, members? Councillor Bell, and then Councillor Al-Samarrai.
Thank you, Kamina. So I looked through the risk assessment fairly carefully, and also the full document. It struck me that the risk assessment was actually carried out for a stadium that was concerned with crowd, with crowd surge and crowds actually, getting stuck in exits and so forth. It wasn't really related at all to COVID. But that's what it appeared to me. And if you look at the actual assessment on the assessment key on page 63, it actually speaks about overall risk that's very high from multiple deaths, high from single death or serious injury, moderate injury leading to a lost time accident, and so forth. Nothing about COVID, nor about distancing, nor about trying to mitigate against catching COVID, and that's really what this is all about. So that's kind of just setting out my stall, as it were. So my first question really is with regards stewarding. Now, it wasn't clear to me just how the stewarding would be managed. I thought that stewarding should specifically be to ensure that people are actually distanced when they're queuing, and it didn't appear to me to be that case. Could an officer actually reassure me that that will truly be implemented, that the distancing is actually part of this stewarding arrangement?
Thank you very much. I'll bring Mr. Morrison in. If Mr. Morrison, are you with us today? Yes. Yes, I see your hand, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Yes, I can confirm that stewarding does focus on the physical distancing in queues, particularly in relation to out of the premises. The issues that arose last time were down to a problem with getting the barriers in place for one of the entrances. That has been resolved. Additional stewarding is being provided, and additional time has been provided to set up those. So we don't anticipate a problem with ensuring physical distancing within those queues.
Okay, Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Yeah, a few more questions, if I may, please. So you've actually attributed a high probability of, looking here, to single death or serious injury from the ball retrieval squad and from social distancing. Now, I don't think that can be right, can it? Because surely the high probability would actually be to actually contract COVID. So that's so in the risk assessment, that's what you have.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bell. What they stated is that the severity is high, the likelihood of it occurring is low, and they've determined that the risk being high. The risk would be for COVID. Control measures have been implemented in terms of the ball retrieval squad, wearing face coverings and disinfecting hands after use. So again, we would not perceive that to be a high risk activity.
Right, but if I look in this risk assessment, assessment, as it were, high is involving a single death or serious injury. There's nothing in there about COVID. This is just a standard risk assessment template you've used.
Sorry. Okay. Apologies, Councillor. That's the risk assessment that's been undertaken by the club rather than by officers, and that is taking into account the COVID risk. This is specifically in relation to the COVID risk. So it is about the high severity in relation to COVID. Yes, they've used their existing risk assessment forms to do this additional COVID risk assessment.
Right. So what would you class as serious injury then?
Well, it'd be contracting COVID and requiring hospital attention.
Right. Okay. Okay. So another question for you. So in the example that you give of a game that was run on the 22nd of July, I appreciate it wasn't at Pittodrie. No, sorry, it was. And there was an issue with tickets marked as inactive. Well, can you perhaps elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you. The club have advised that there was a one-off issue in relation to the digital ticketing scheme they had in place. There were 1,500 digital tickets implemented, and the issue affected about 200 of those. Due to human error, after the initial tickets were issued, they were revoked. They were then reissued and had to be re-downloaded. Where spectators had not downloaded the renewed ticket, the ticket was showing as inactive. So it was a one-off problem. The club have looked at the issues and have assured us that they've got to the bottom of that, and there should not be a repetition of that.
Okay, thank you. So I noticed as well in the document you talk about 100 and odd lateral flow tests that might be conducted on supporters. Are they going to be random tests, or are they already being, or will they have been carried out as a requirement to actually attend the match?
Okay, there's a requirement for every spectator to have undertaken an LFD and have a negative result. So that negative result has to be from that day. Where a supporter turns up without a valid LFD result, they have the club have got a healthcare provider to be able to assist with providing tests when required. And for the last match, total of 24 tests were administered.
Okay, so that is for every spectator, is it?
Every person entering the premises has to have had a. But for those that are club, they have a PCR test. For those spectators, every individual has to have an LFD result.
Right. And one final question, if I may, Kamina. So when it comes to actually, so I can understand you have your stewards in place for marshalling people to get into the stadium, and clearly also for managing going to the loo and so forth. How about leaving the stadium? Because clearly that's free, could potentially be a free for all, couldn't it? How will you manage that?
The club has a system again for marshalling people leaving the table, and that's included within the spectators' code of conduct, which dictates how that will be left. Tannoy messages will be put out, and the marshals will be there to control the exits as well. The exits are less of a concern than the entrance because of the fact that they're wide open for people to leave at a greater throughput than arriving.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bell. Son, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, it's just briefly, it's just maybe to ease Councillor Bell's concerns a little bit. There is actually a separate document, the third document that was sent out with your papers, which is entitled AFC versus Dundee United Risk Assessment Match Day Partial Crowds, and that's entitled Risk Assessment for Partial Crowd Events Additional COVID Controls. So that's in addition to the standard risk assessment. So there is a separate one for purely COVID issues there as well. So just to bring that to your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Al-Samurai next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back and talk about the stewarding. I note in the report that there were some concerns raised about the actual managing of queues around about the toilet facilities, and really it's just to seek more assurance that it's not simply a case of that there are just going to be more stewards, that there has been some substantial training done here about enforcing this, the guidelines for physical distancing. So I wondered if an officer could give me some assurance around about that, and equally around about the seating that has to be observed while watching the match, and in that, how is the enforcement going to happen if people are using seats that are not designated to be used for this match?
Thank you, Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, thank you, convener. The club have advised that both they have additional stewarding in place, and they are refreshing the training to those stewards with the requirements to manage queues and to ensure that spectators comply with the seating requirements. The seating requirements are actually now less strict than the club have applied, with people being able to gather within groups of 15. That isn't being facilitated. It's only one booking per group of 4. But the legislation would have allowed a more relaxed approach to that seating.
Okay, Councillor Samurai.
Could I just come back if that's
Yes, of course.
So when the group met, they were satisfied with these additional provisions made by the club, that they feel that this additional training will be suitable so that if there's a report to come forward from this match, it won't identify the same problems.
I can confirm that the officers were satisfied that the club was doing what they could do to control that. It is always difficult controlling members of the public. So I can't give any guarantee that there won't be people who disregard those instructions that are provided to them. A lot of this comes down to personal responsibility for individuals to comply with those rules, but the club have put in measures to manage that risk.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gregg, next, please.
Thank you. I had a similar set of questions on that theme of managing the spectators, because the feedback from the previous matches does indicate that there was some difficulties in managing the crowds within the stands, within the queues, and also at the dispersal time. So I appreciate that there is that increase in stewards and hopefully enhanced training and information. But I think that in such a large crowded environment, it will remain quite a challenge to contain behaviour as required. So I've got a question about the risk assessment. The risk assessment, there are the 2 stages, and all of the risks at the first stage are either medium or high risk. And then by going through the process, the high risk are managed down and reduced to a medium risk. So all of the risks are medium, and to me that still seemed quite a considerable concern about the potential for harm when all of the risks are medium and there are no low risks. So I just wondered if it was possible to get some information on that. I'm just somewhat surprised that the recommendation is to approve with no low risks at all. Why is that?
Mr. Morrison, over to you again.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I think the issue comes down to the fact that COVID is still in the population, and we know that when people get together, there is a risk of transmission. So we cannot have a situation where people are gathering together in accordance with the rules, because we now have 1 meter distancing in place. We have 0 meters distancing between groups of up to 15 people. That still leaves a residual risk. So the risk is still there. So it can't be negated. It can only be managed. And because of the nature of it, and potentially the club has been conservative in its application of that. But I'd rather they stated that the risk is still real. There is the potential for transmission, as there is in every venue in the city, including our homes when we have visitors to them.
Thank you. Councillor Gregg.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, convener. whilst people have been talking, I just thought, come up with another question. Could I please ask how you will physically prove that you've had a negative lateral flow test?
Okay.
Mr. Morrison, do you know the answer to that?
Yes, thank you. So every individual is required to do an LFD test by the NHS, and register the result with the NHS system, which gives you an email and a text message, and it is showing those details to the security, which will show that you've got an LFD test for that date.
Right, because of course I can do a lateral flow test at home. Those kits are available, aren't they? And there's no way of proving that that was negative unless I've taken a photograph of it. I don't see that in the screening at all.
No, the requirement is based on trust that people will register the correct result. Of course, there is nothing they can do if someone lies in that system, but that is the same system that's in place for the whole population as a control. We're relying on personal responsibility. So the expectation is that everyone undertakes their test and then registers that result appropriately with the NHS system.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, members? No. I think we're in a different environment now to the normal football matches, and of course, Aberdeen Football Club had the international match. They've learnt from that. They've increased the number of stewards, and again, it's increased over the pro rata basis. I would have expected them to put in maybe 105, 110, but they're actually putting in 125 stewards, which is good news. My understanding is that the doors are going to open, or the gates, or whatever they call them, are going to be open 10 minutes earlier. So that again allows for the freedom of movement into the ground and reduces the amount of queuing involved. Again, when we looked at the previous application, the NHS had actually initially put in an objection. That objection was removed. Now the NHS are telling us that they're supportive of what's being done. So that, again, I think is a very positive move on their behalf. I would be suggesting at this stage that we actually grant the application, unless, Sandy, do you want to come in with anything that we need to know before we do that?
Thank you, Kevin. No, I think you've covered it all. I would say I think Mr. Morrison made a very good point that I think the way the risk assessment has been completed by the club shows they are taking it seriously. I would rather that than just a bunch of low risk, because it's not been looked at properly, to be perfectly honest. So, yeah, I think actually Mr. Morrison maybe wants to come back in.
He does. I see his hand up there. Mr. Morrison.
Yes, thank you, convener. It was just one thing to be aware. This is the last match that is currently scheduled for whilst we're expected to be in level 0. When we move beyond level 0, it's anticipated that the requirements would change. However, if the change to beyond level 0 is postponed beyond the 9th, there is a further match on the 12th of August. I had anticipated a slightly revised request from the football club to accommodate this match and any future match while still in level 0. That hasn't materialised, so I don't know if or how the committee could consider that to avoid having to repeat the process at short notice if we don't move out of level 0 on the 9th.
Okay, Sandy, would you like to comment on that?
It's difficult because we can only really determine what's in front of you generally. I would say it would probably be reasonable, depending on if they put in for the same figure and the Safety Advisory Group and the NHS were happy with it for future ones, you could provide a delegated power to grant for this match and future ones on the same conditions. However, if they look to increase it again slightly further, then I suspect we would need to do this again, because it would be a different application that you would then be considering.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any questions from members on those points just raised? No. Are we happy to grant the application?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, members,
Yes.
thank you very much. Now, the other point is, are we happy to delegate powers to officers if an application comes in which is a mirror image of the application that you have in front of us at the moment?
Agreed.
I think that it's been particularly comforting to have the feedback from the NHS. So, if by you mean the same kind of application, then yes. If it has that support, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. The application itself being a mirror image, but the support for the application coming from both the officers and, of course, the NHS. If that's the same, can we delegate those powers to officers for one match only?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Yeah, just to be clear, if there were any objections or representations from either the Safety Advisory Group or the NHS, then we wouldn't be granting that under delegated powers. It would come back to yourselves. So. And can I just clarify again, and again, it's just for the matter for the record, so it's an increase in the total number of supporters and the slight increase in the hospitality numbers that you're granting as well.
It is, most certainly.
Thanks.
Okay, right, members, thank you very much for your support. Thanks for your attendance, and we'll see you at our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.